Greetings all, this is Hairy Nick. How are you guys? We're going to take another look at some of the X-Wing lists that you guys have submitted on the channel. Today we're going to start talking about this little guy right here, or in fact, this little guy right here, or even this one right here, which is unpainted because, like every other male hobbyist out there, I have about 1,000 projects which I've started and not completed. The FIRESPRAY is one of my favourite chips in the game of X-Wing, not because it's good, because let's face it, it's not, but because it's one of the ships that I first flew when I started out playing the game. My first ever store tournament was a dual FIRESPRAY list, and I had a lot of fun back then. And it's a ship that's had a very special place in my heart ever since I started playing X-Wing. It's a lot of fun, it's very flavorful, it's hard to build around, it's hard to make it good, I think is the right way of putting it. But nevertheless, it is a very fun ship, at least on the casual basis. So before we dive into these lists, let's have a quick chat about the challenges that the FIRESPRAY faces, especially in the current meta these days. The ship was introduced Wave 2 on the Imperial faction, and this was released alongside the Millennium Falcon. Now, the Millennium Falcon immediately made a huge impact on the meta, was very playable right from the get-go, and it took a long time before it dropped off again, ultimately to be reignited by its fix, which it got about a year ago in the Heroes of the Resistance pack. The FIRESPRAY was a bit more challenging. I just get the impression with these pilot abilities that FFG didn't really know how best to capitalize off what the ship is doing. Boba Fett, for example, is an interesting ability. The ability to change your banks from one direction to another on the fly seems really cool, but I've talked about this before, and it just seems to be a case of if you are a competent pilot, you are rarely going to basically face the exact wrong direction when choosing your dial. There might be some scenarios where this is very useful, and for some reason either of those maneuvers may be very good. You may be able to leverage this over your opponent, but those are going to be very, very rare. I like the flavour here. The idea is Boba Fett can hunt ships perfectly because he can constantly change the direction he's flying in. But in terms of practicality, it was never that fantastic. Calf Scarlet, same kind of deal. We had a very light stress mechanic in that if your opponent cancels criticals that you try to hit them with, that ship suffers a stress token. And look, better stress control mechanics have come along since then. I will say that this is one of the cases where FFG probably hedged their bets a bit early on. There wasn't a lot of stress control back in Wave 2. In fact, off the top of my head, I don't think there was any. So basically this was a way of saying, okay, we're going to just lightly approach this. We're going to say, okay, here's a ship that can give their opponent stress. We're not going to overcook this. We're not going to make this too powerful because that has a chance of breaking the meta. And it just proved to be a bit too conservative. Of course, nowadays we have ships like a Sarge Ventress that just dump stress without caring. And while the Sarge Ventress is very strong, she's in no way meta breaking. The ship's got some pretty decent stats in 3 red dice, 2 agility, 6 hull, 4 shields, focus, target lock, and evade the action, and a very full upgrade bar with cannons, bombs, cruise, and missile. And probably one of the biggest issue with it is it has a lot of things that don't necessarily gel together. For example, that 3 red primary and a cannon slot, it's not that valuable, to be honest. When your primary attack is already 3 red dice, when you can shoot at the forward and the rear, attaching a cannon to it isn't that appealing. And I know, back when this was released, it was the only option to stick a cannon on, and it made a lot of sense back then, but nowadays we have things like Skeeks that only have 2 primary attack. We might be seeing this TIE fighter from the Han Solo movie that has a cannon attached to the side of it. That'll probably be another thing with the 2 basic attack and a cannon attached to it. And when your primary attack is already quite low, the cannon becomes more appealing because it improves the attack you would otherwise have quite significantly. And what you've got to appreciate is when these ships are costed, the factor of your primary and the factor of being able to take a cannon is taken into account. And that's why I don't like having those 2 things alongside each other. It also has bombs and missiles, which again aren't really where the ship wants to be. Again, I just want to remind you guys that this was the first ship that could take bombs, and from that point of view, it probably made a lot more sense back in Wave 2, but nowadays there are much better options for basically both of these things. You don't want to sink a whole heap more points with missiles on this guy in general, because the primary attack's already good, or you want to rely on a cannon or something. It's just too much. It's spread too thin, and that's one of the biggest challenges this ship has. What helped to overcome some of these challenges was when the Most Wanted pack was released, and we got some scum pilots for this. which made the most sense. Obviously, if this ship was released after the Scum faction had its inception, it would have just been on the Scum faction. It never would have been on the Empire. Calf Scarlet, for example, makes absolutely no sense on the Empire faction. She's a pirate. She actively raided Imperial ships. So from that point of view, yeah, a bit of a flavor fail, but they've improved that ever since. And what came with these scum pilots, we got another Boba Fett and we got another Kaf Scarlet, and both of these guys have made a lot more sense ever since. They have pilot skills that are very relevant to what this ship wants to be doing. Boba Fett being able to re-roll 1 dice for every enemy ship at range 1 on attack and on defense is a very, very powerful ability. Let's set aside all the jank stats about this ship. That is a really powerful ability still today, absolutely. Kaf Scarlet, when she's shooting at the rear, she gets to attack with 1 extra dice. Adding dice for any reason whatsoever is always super powerful on attacks. And again, it's a very relevant ability because of that. The only thing really holding back these pilots is that frame and the combination of upgrades it can take. It's had a few buffs along the way with some of the upgrades it can take. When we had Wave 9, we had Tail Gunner, and everyone thought that was the card that was going to make Kaf Scarlet work. Ultimately, in my opinion, I've used Tail Gunner and various things on Kaf Scarlet, and I've just found that Dengar, for one more point, is just a straight up better upgrade. Sure, there are examples where Dengar is absolutely worse, and sure, there are examples where Tail Gunner is so relevant because you're taking on aces, but more times than not, mathematically speaking, Dengar is going to improve your attack more than Tail Gunner. And that sucks because that's really the best thing you can put Tail Gunner on. A couple waves after that, we also had the Bomblet Generator, which is fantastic. Thanks to the Andrasta title that came in the Most Wanted pack, the Firespray is one of the few ships that can just take the Bomblet Generator right out of the pack. It's basically the Firespray and the Skirg H6 bomb, which already has 2 bomb icons on the Scum faction that can do that. And of course with Cad Bane we can also put it on the Quad Jumper, but the Firespray does not need any point investment to take the Bomblet Generator, which is a fantastic buff for the ship. And in my mind, ever since the Skirg Bomber came out, it's basically one of the few reasons to take a Firespray these days. And that's just my thoughts in terms of where the ship is at right now, and I'm going to take that into account when looking at these lists. So let's start off with this one here by Mr. Noldentification 1. And before we dive into this, I just want to point out that the commenter here has given me a few options, which is always good to talk about. If you guys want to submit lists and actually say, hey, I'm not sure whether to do this and this, just put it in the comment and I'll be more than happy to discuss it when I put it into a video. For example, here we have Boba Fett with either VI or Fearlessness, also with Mangler Cannon, Bombardier, Homing Missile, and Andrasta Bomblet Generator and Engine upgrades, alongside Manaroo with Draw Their Fire or a Score to Settle, and Recon Specialist or Dengar with the Punishing 1 title. Now, for those of you who haven't been playing X-Wing for as long as I have, this is kind of a variation on what was called Dengaroo, which was a list that used Dengar alongside Manaroo, in that you have Manaroo that can just pass all these tokens, target locks, blah blah blah, over to one other big ship that just has a really powerful attack, basically can't be hit because of all the shenanigans built in that list. That was nerfed off the face of the planet, thankfully, in a few FAQs. But it's still an archetype that can exist if Manaroo and another ship is done right, if there's an option for it to make it work. I don't think that Boba Fett and Manaroo is necessarily the best thing you can be doing with Manaroo, but it's still a really cool idea nonetheless. Let's talk about some of the options you've left here. Veteran Instincts or Fearlessness. I'm actually torn over this one. My gut always says Fearlessness on Boba Fett. I like Pilot Skill 8 with engine upgrades with that ability. It makes a lot of sense. But in a list with the Bomblet Generator and Homing Missiles, I can see some real value in Veteran Instincts. If your opponent's flying Pilot Skill 9s, especially with the Bomblet Generator, that's going to be really, really nasty. Because it means they basically just can't fly behind Boba Fett at all without risk of being bombed, and that really sucks for them. Also, you've got Homing Missile, which pretty much means you always want to fly last. If you're forced to fly first and your opponent flies afterwards into range 3, that's going to be a real feel-bad moment because you want the most opportunity to use that homing missile, especially considering it's a homing missile that's good against aces, and those are the ones that's really going to capitalize off this. So honestly, I can see a world where either Fearlessness or Veteran Instincts are good. Looking at the rest of the build, we got a bit of spice. I like Bombardier, Bomblet Generator, nothing wrong with that. Andrasta means you can take that for free, as previously mentioned. We've also got Mangler Cannon and Homing Missile, and I think there's definitely an argument to cut either one of these. Boba Fett already has a really cool primary attack, and that basically takes away a lot of the value of Mangler Cannon, especially if we take Fearlessness. You definitely don't want Mangler Cannon if you have Fearlessness, because you want to boost into range 1, get that 4 dice attack with a reroll with Fearlessness. The critical is good, but you're going to roll a lot of natural criticals anyway because Boba Fett's Boba Fett and he's just like that. And Mangler Cannon doesn't add to your dice roll in that scenario, and sure, at range 2 to 3, it gives you an attack you otherwise wouldn't have, but it's not giving you any more dice, it's just improving the quality of your dice. And I just don't think that's worth 4 points. In terms of homing missile, I really like it in this build. Look, just to address the elephant in the room, yes, obviously we can take harpoon missile instead, and in terms of competitiveness, that's probably the more exciting choice. But if you specifically want to hunt aces, there is a fringe argument to taking home missiles over that. It does cost 1 more point and is probably less relevant overall, which doesn't feel great. But still, a good idea nonetheless. I think if you are going to keep either Mangler or homing missile, I'd just keep the homing missile. Drop the Mangler off and think about somewhere else on the list where you can take 4 points. You could, if you wanted to, take off Mangler Cannon and put another bomb on Boba Fett. You do have 1 more slot. A proxy mine, especially with VI, might be very, very potent. Just making sure you get that in the right position, it could be a lot more powerful than Bomber Generator, just as a one-off. With Manaroo, we have Draw Their Fire or a Score to Settle. I definitely don't think a Score to Settle is the right way of going here, because in general, with this archetype, Manaroo is the one that gets shot first. And Manaroo is not especially great at capitalizing off of it. I mean, I know she's got Punishing One and Dengar, but you want Boba Fett as your main attacker. Manaroo's attack are going to be incidental, if anything, and Draw Their Fire is just good. Draw Their Fire is a great way of protecting Boba Fett. You want to be within range 1 of him anyway, so if you're flying it right, Draw Their Fire is going to be a great option. Recon Spec or Dengar, I'm probably leaning towards Recon Spec again. Recon Spec is always a great crew on Boba Fett, so if you can use it on Manaroo to give Boba Fett those 2 focus, it's basically doing the same thing, but you're freeing up Boba Fett to do his actions, which is really, really cool. And obviously Punishing One, yeah, I don't know. This is, in my mind, the biggest issue with the list, because you have to basically use this point sink. With the classic Dengaroo was able to push the sort of the high 60s in terms of the points, and Boba Fett just doesn't want to do that naturally. Punishing One's cool, you're going to get 1 more red dice on your Manaroo attacks, but I don't know. I don't know if the Manaroo attacks is really what makes this list great. It's a very cool concept, but there's definitely cards on here which I don't feel are doing as much work as they could in other scenarios. And nothing really else to do with the points, and that hurts a bit. Theoretically, we could look at putting a Z95 in this list, and maybe that's just better than Punishing One Mangler Cannon, and maybe chucking a Z95 with a Harpoon Missile, get 2 Alpha Strikers, put a bit more damage on the board early. That could be a bit of fun. I don't know if it's exactly the right call to make, but I think it might just help this list along a little bit. This next list here really speaks to me because it's Boba Fett and Asajj Ventress, a combination that I've flown for a very long time. I stopped flying it after the Scoop Bomber was released and bombs just became too oppressive in the meta, because this kind of list just really hates bombs. Boba Fett has Fearlessness, Dengar, Cluster Missiles, Glitter Stim, Guidance Chips, Slave 1, and extra munitions. Asajj Ventress has VI, K4 Security Droid, Black Market Lost Tools, Rigged Cargo Chute, Countermeasures, and Shadowcaster. Okay, start off with Boba Fett. Fearlessness, yep, love it. Nothing wrong with that at all. Now, what we have here is Dengar, Cluster Missiles, Glitter Stim, Guidance Chips, and extra munitions. That package there gives you 2 really big, powerful, dumb attacks. I've tried this before myself. I will say this, I love it when it works, but 70% of my games I couldn't get it to work, and it was really frustrating. Now obviously you're a different player to me, Kingman Highborn, and you may find that you get this to work quite often, but it's a really feel bad thing when you dump so many points into a range 1 attack that requires a target lock, and you just need everything to go right for it to work. And your opponent's like flying aces or something and they just fly around it. I will say though, for those of you curious, the reason this is so powerful is because in range 1, if Boba Fett is facing an enemy ship and you are also inside their firing arc, with cluster missiles you have 2 3-dice attack that will add an extra hit result, will re-roll you, in this case, 2 or 3 dice every single time. You're going to convert all your focus results off one of those glitter stims, and you're going to get a crit somewhere across those 2-3 attacks. Just worth noting with guidance chips, you cannot use it on both of those volleys. You can only use it on one, but still really cool. And extra munitions means you can do it twice. If you can make it work, then good luck to you, because it's a lot of fun. Asajj Ventress is just a good basic all-round build. I mean, obviously, there's the Time Walk Asajj list that everyone's using with Lutz, Ruzzy, and glitter stim and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's fine not to do that. I quite like Asajj Ventress with Veteran Instincts alongside Boba Fett. It's really cool how you can get those tractor tokens out in order to make Boba Fett punch even harder. Again, you're banking even harder on that combo working. Which, if that's what you're going to do, that's what you're going to do. K4 security droid means you can punch harder. It's basically a redundancy for Dengar because you pretty much want Dengar on Asajj. If I had any criticism for this list is I would switch Dengar and K4 security droid because Boba Fett wants target locks to get off those cluster missiles, and he already has a reroll at range 1 anyway, and that lessens the value on Dengar. Asajj just wants rerolls. She has no use for target locks beyond that, so I think it makes sense to switch these upgrades around. Black Market Size Tool, bit of fun, bit more incidental damage if you can make it work, but not super crazy. Really good against the Inquisitor and Suntafel, but in other scenarios, not an upgrade I love. Ridge Cargo Chute, yep, does exactly what Asajj wants to do. Always a good inclusion. Countermeasures Shadowcaster, yep. And I think as a kind of all-in list on the Firespray, this is a lot of fun. Just take your time with it because, oh man, it really feels bad when you overshoot or you just, for whatever reason, can't get that missile off. You've got to be so patient with this type of build. This next one is an Imperial Firespray list, and I spoke before about my issues with the Imperial Firespray pilots, so let's have a real think about this, because I actually think this is very interesting. I don't like the Imperial Calf Scarlet, but I like what's been done here by Bleach Orange. Imperial Calf Scarlet has Expertise, Mangler Cannon, Kylo Ren, Andrasta, and Bomblet Generator, and Crassus Trellix, a pilot that I usually give no quarter to whatsoever, has Heavy Laser Cannon and Gunner. Now, first of all, let's look at Cath, because I think this is really interesting. Because we have Kylo Ren on Cath, and this is something that's never really occurred to me. We also have, of course, Mangler Cannon, because we want reliable ways of delivering crits to our opponent. And Kylo Ren gives us a great option in capitalizing off those crits. So just alongside each other, I like having these two cards, and it's actually interesting to think because the Imperial faction doesn't actually have any other way of having Mangler Cannon and Kylo Ren, unless it's on a Lambda shuttle, but the Lambda shuttle just doesn't want that. It's got better options anyway. So I like that combo. And what is happening here is you're saying, okay, I'm going to Kylo Ren you the blinded pilot, so when you get your next crit, you're going to get dealt a blinded pilot. Mangler Cannon is going to make that very likely, but if you cancel the Mangler Cannon crit, I'm giving you another disadvantage. I'm giving you a stress. This is kind of a way to hedge your bets to make sure there's always downside in your opponent's ship. It's going to suck if your opponent's list just doesn't care too much about stress because that always gives them an out. But nevertheless, it's a lot of fun. Expertise, always cool on the Firespray. It's one of the cards I really like. Alongside that Mangler Cannon, if you roll, say, 2 hits and a focus, that's going to turn into 2 hits and a crit, which is just really solid. Andrasta and Bomblet Generator, I just think it's good. For 3 points, having the Bomblet Generator on the Imperial faction, no less. It's just really good. It's good incidental damage. If your opponent gets behind you, it's going to be harder, obviously, to deal with their stuff. Mangler Cannon cannot shoot backwards, so it's great to have something to leverage over your opponent if they try and fly behind you. And Crassus Trellix. I'm not a fan of this build, to be honest. Heavy Laser Cannon and Gunner is 12 points stacked on this guy. He almost cost 50 points by himself. I like Heavy Laser Cannon on him. That's a bit of fun because Crassus Trellix does not get the downside of Heavy Laser Cannon in that when you re-roll a dice with Heavy Laser Cannon, you can keep the crit if it turns into a crit. The whole thing with Crassus Trellix and Heavy Laser Cannon, though, is it's not going to miss most of the time. And that means you're going to get no value out of Gunner most of the time. Yep, sure, against aces, that's going to have a lot of value. But again, we're talking about very narrow scenarios, so it's probably not what you want to be doing with this. You know what I think, Bleach Orange? I think this is fun. What you've gone here is for high interaction with your opponent and a good fun casual list. So I would take out Gunner, and here's my suggestion. My suggestion is Darth Vader, because that is a really fun crew that you want to be playing around with. Sure, it means that Crassus is going to take a lot of damage, but you don't care. He has 2 firing arcs. It's a great solid way of making Vader proc turn after turn, and you can damage race your opponent with a Heavy Laser Cannon and a Firespray. Decent stats. It's got 10 hit points and 2 green dice and an evade token, so even with the disadvantage of giving you a ship, I like the idea of what that's doing. Cath can lead, Cath can get the shields off, and Crassus Trellix can sink in crits. And that's just a lot of stupid fun. Now, I know Vader and Kylo do not combo together. There's no need to point that out to me. I'm well aware of that, guys. But just in terms of what Cress's Trellix is trying to do, I just like that idea. I think that's a bit more fun, and it's going to feel a lot better than Gunner, because I just don't think Gunner's going to work, and 5 dead points on the list is not good. It's not what you want. But overall, Bleach Orange, I really like this idea. I like the way you've pushed Kath here. And it's just a bit of out of the square thinking, which I really like to talk about on this channel, because that's where the great X-Wing lists come from. I don't think Imperial Kath Skala is in any danger of making a top tier list, but nonetheless, this kind of thinking is what gets lists there. Alright, we have one more list to look at by Mr. Mew, and this is one that was left on my channel basically when I said I'm going to start doing list reviews. So in case you guys are worried that you leave me a list and I don't review it, just give it time, because 6 months later I might do it. This is Fat Kath. And by the way, to Mr. Mew, I know that you've since posted an updated version of this. I will get to that eventually. But for the time being, I really wanted to look at this because Fat Fen, in that a Fen that is taking way too many upgrades, is something I've thought about for a long time. When Fenrir was originally released, I was thinking of using it with Dengar and making a Fengar list. Ultimately, I think the issue with that, and with this also, is we're just pushing these two pilots points-wise a bit too far. Fenrir, for example, has Expertise Advanced Proton Torpedoes, Auto Thrusters, and Concord Dawn Protector, which totals 41 points on the Protectorate Starfighter. Holy moly. I don't think you can justify going over 35, 36 with this, and that's kind of scary considering how fragile this ship is. Very fun, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this wouldn't be fun casually, but you've just got to be so careful with that. And Kath Skala has Expertise, Heavy Laser Cannon, Dengar, Engine Upgrades, Andrasta, and Bomblet Generator. And this is an approach with Kath Skala, which I'm not a huge fan of, but I know a lot of people are, in taking Heavy Laser Cannon, because it means you have 4 dice at the front and at the rear. And that's really cool, it's really fun. It means you have a lot of flexibility in the way you fly Kath. Personally, I don't like putting a cannon on her. I just prefer putting on engine upgrades and relying on that rear shot. But that's just me. I like to go a bit more harder with my synergy, and that's the way I like to fly. This Kath, however, can basically deliver a huge attack no matter where she is. With Bomblet Generator, I've talked about it before. For 3 points, it offers something very significant. I think it's absolutely worth taking in basically all fire spray lists you can fit it in, so no complaints there. And Expertise, Heavy Laser Cannon, Dengar, Engine Upgrades, it's just a really powerful attacker, and that's just really, really fun. I will say though, I think in the case of both of these ships, you probably pushed them points-wise a bit too far. I mean, oh man, that's just going to be so brutal. I mean, my version of Kath basically is this that doesn't use Heavy Laser Cannon. It's a whole 7 points more than what I consider very comfortable space for Kath Scarlet to be in. And look, you could think about dropping Heavy Laser Cannon, dropping those Advanced Proton Torpedoes on Fenrir, and even sliding in another ship into the list. But let's put that aside. Let's say, you know what, I'm just going to stack as many points on these 2 very aggressive ships as much as I can and try and end a game as fast as I can. And if that is your goal, if you want to play some nice casual tournaments and make that your goal, Mr. Mew, this is going to be so much fun. I love the thinking behind it. It's ultra aggro. I don't think it's going to win competitive tournaments, but really, really cool concept. And it's the kind of thing that I would like to see work in X-Wing under the right circumstances. It's kind of like what Rear Admiral Shenru does on the Imperial faction by having a very fat small ship alongside him. Think like Rear Admiral Shenru in Vessery, or Rear Admiral Shenru in Crickdraw, Kylo Ren and stuff like that. This is kind of a version of that. I think the problem with this is the ships are a bit more fragile than those Imperial counterparts, and it's probably the reason that this isn't going to be as competitive. But super, super fun, super cool. And please, Mr. Mew, if you fly this at tournaments, let me know how it goes. I want to hear all about that massive Advanced Proton Torpedo attack. That sounds like way too much fun. And thank you so much, guys, for submitting those lists. I've been wanting to talk about fire sprays for a very long time now. Thank you for your patience. I know I haven't gotten one of these videos out in a little while. I'm going to try and do these more regularly. Just over the past month, we had a lot of tournaments to talk about, lots of Legion stuff to talk about, and we had to put this on the sideline. But for the time being, we don't have a lot on the schedule, so I'm going to be trying to put out one of these a week. In the meantime, guys, thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe, like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter, and I will catch you later.